As we began our studies of the New Testament stories, we heard about Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, and we heard about their son, who was born somewhat miraculously as promised by God. But we learned of their son John, the one who would later be known as John the Baptist, and who would baptize Jesus in the Jordan River, point to him and say, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." So now, back to the story of John for a bit. Story 22, the death of John the Baptist. About this time, Herod the Tetrarch heard how renowned Jesus had become. He said to his servants, "This fellow must be John the Baptist, risen from the dead. That's why he can do these mighty works." Now Herod was the one who had John arrested, had him bound, and then put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. John kept telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod feared John because he knew John was just and holy. Herod had wanted to put John to death, but he was afraid of the people since they thought John was a prophet. Now when John was in prison, he had heard about the works of Christ. So he sent two of his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for someone else?" "Go and show John those things that you have heard and seen," Jesus told them. "The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. Blessed is the one who does not fall away because of me." John was in prison, put there by Herod. And Herod is not a good king. He's put there because he had desired his brother's wife and took her as his own. And when John told him that that was wrong, well, that upset Herod and Herodias very much. So John is arrested and thrown into prison. And, John probably had to know that he wasn't going to get out of this prison. This probably was not going to end well, and it may very well be that he was a little bit concerned about his followers, who might have been wondering, geez, is this what happens if we follow Jesus, and if we say what God says is true and right? Will we be thrown into prison to one day have our life taken from us? And John sends them to them, I think less because he doubts and more because he wants them to hear the reminder that will come from Jesus' lips. And Jesus points to everything that the people have been seeing him do. For he healed the blind, he restored the paralyzed, the lepers were cleansed, on and on. And most of these were signs right from the Old Testament promises of God about the things that the Messiah, the long-promised one, or the Christ, would do when he came. And he had come. And it was Jesus. Yes, he was the one. No, they didn't have to look for another. When Herod's birthday was celebrated, Herodias' daughter had danced. Herod was pleased with her dancing, and he had made an oath to give her whatever she wanted. Her mother had told her to tell Herod, "Give me John the Baptist's head on a platter." The king was sorry when she asked for this, but because he had sworn an oath and people who were eating with him had heard it, he commanded that John's head be given to her. He had the imprisoned John beheaded. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she took it to her mother. John's disciples came and picked up the body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. And so John, the forerunner, the one who was to go before the Messiah, Jesus, he too suffers a tragic death the hands of evil men and women. And it perhaps should be a little bit of a preview or a little bit of a glimpse for us that the way that the one who prepared the way had gone in similar fashion might be the way that the Christ would one day go. All right, story 23, the feeding of the 5,000. When the apostles returned to Jesus and told him about what they had done and what they had taught, he said to them, "Come away to a desert place and rest a while." So many people were coming and going that they had no time to rest or even eat. It was nearing the time for the Passover. So they left by boat to a deserted place. The people saw them leaving. Many people knew Jesus, so they ran, coming from all the towns around, and got to the place first. When Jesus arrived, he saw how many people were there, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep that had no shepherd. He then began to teach them many things, and healed those who needed healing. Late in the day, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it's getting late. Send the people away so that they may go into the country around here and into the villages to buy bread. They have nothing to eat." "You give them something to eat," he answered. Looking at the huge crowd, he asked Philip, "Where could we buy bread for them?" He knew what he was going to do. 200 denarii would not buy enough food for each of them to have a little piece, Philip said. "Should we spend 200 denarii for bread," they asked, "and then feed them?" "Find out how many loaves you have," he said to them. When they found out, one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "A boy is here who has 5 loaves and 2 small fish, but how far would they go among so many?" He told them to have everyone sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of 100 or groups of 50. When he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves. He gave the pieces to his disciples to give to the people. He did the same with the 2 fish. Everyone ate and was filled. The disciples picked up 12 baskets full of the leftover bread and fish. About 5,000 men had eaten, not including the women and the children. Then the people who had seen the miracle that Jesus did said, "This really is the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus saw that they wanted to force him to be king, he went to a hill to be by himself. The story of the feeding of the 5,000. It's the only miracle that is recorded in each of the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Jesus, well, the scene begins with him having compassion on the people. And he probably knows, or he does know, that he is about to feed them miraculously, and in doing so, to provide his followers and his disciples back then with an object lesson about who he is and what he was able to do. When he asked Philip about it, Philip says, "Look, like 2/3 of a year's salary would not be enough to buy bread, for them to have a little bit, let alone to eat and be filled." So where the disciples see a huge problem, Jesus sees an opportunity, and he takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He blesses them, multiplies them, distributes them to be given out to the people, and over 5,000 people are fed, and 12 baskets full of leftovers are collected. Well, the people think this is pretty cool. In the ancient world, where food was a real concern on a daily and annual basis, wow, someone that could just take a little bit and feed thousands, man, he would make for a great king. And he is a great king. But they were focused on the here and now. They were focused on their belly and their physical needs. He was even a far greater king than they realized. And they didn't need to make him their earthly king, because he was their heavenly king. If only they would see it. Jesus continues to feed his people even today with his word and with his body and blood in the Holy Sacrament. It's a marvelous story of Jesus, the Lord of all creation, the Creator himself, able to feed thousands, starting with so little. On the heels of this story, then, we jump right to story 24, where we see Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee. Immediately Jesus urged his disciples to get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side of the Sea of Galilee while he sent the crowds away. When they were gone, he went up a hill by himself to pray. When darkness came, he was there alone. The boat, which was crossing the lake toward Capernaum, was now in the middle of the lake. It was being tossed about by waves because the wind was so strong. In the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost!" they yelled fearfully. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid," he said. "Lord, if it is you," Peter said, "ask me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Peter stepped out of the boat and walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the boisterous wind, he became afraid, and he began to sink. "Lord, save me," he yelled. Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him. "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" he asked. When they both had climbed into the boat, the wind stopped blowing. Everyone in the boat worshipped him. "Truly you are the Son of God," they said. When they had crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. On the heels of this great feeding miracle, we have the disciples alone in a storm-tossed boat. They see this figure walking toward them. They're guessing it's a ghost or something. It turns out to be Jesus. Almost makes you wonder, did he know they were in trouble? But he walks and catches up with them. Peter says, "If it's you, have me come to you." And initially he's able to. He steps out of the boat and he begins to walk on the water as well. But then, and I can almost imagine the scene, as he gets farther away from the boat, and Jesus is still a ways off, and the waves are huge and the wind is blowing, he begins to wonder, he begins to doubt, and he begins to sink. And he has to cry out once again, "Lord, save me." And Jesus does, as he has, and as he does time and time again. When the storms of our lives threaten to overwhelm us, or when they cause us to begin to question or doubt, is God really good? Does he really mean it? Are his promises secure? We do well to turn back to Christ and to cry out, "Lord, save me all over again. Save me, strengthen my faith, restore me, and give me courage in the face of my doubt and worry." And just as Jesus reached out for Peter, he'll be there for us as well. For he is the Lord of all creation, and he has power over the wind and the wave, over the seas himself.